New York is in a crisis. We have a government that is completely and totally out of control. They're overspending, overtaxing, overregulating, and violating the rights of the people of the state of New York. And it's time for someone to correct the problems that are emanating from Albany to the people of the state of New York. Primary Challenge is launching a new project. That project we're calling is New Amsterdam Project. And the goal of this project is to afford the people of the 53 counties of upstate New York the right to self-determination by seceding from the state of New York and establishing a separate political entity known as New Amsterdam. Andrew Cuomo in 2014 said this. He said that people who are right to life, pro-assault weapon, anti-gay conservatives have no place in New York. And I agree with him. We don't have any place in New York. And so I'm taking Andrew up on his invitation to leave the state of New York, and I'm asking the residents of the 53 counties of upstate New York to join me in our exodus from New York. This is a proposed map to show you the counties that would be involved in the secession. Those that are in red are New Amsterdam, and those that are in blue would remain as part of New York State. There are a lot of reasons why we should make this change, many reasons why the people of upstate New York no longer feel as though the government of New York represents them. We're completely and wholly disenfranchised by the political process in New York. But one of the reasons that we want to separate ourselves is this idea that illegal immigrants can simply come to New York State and be treated as, in fact, be treated in some cases better than citizens of the state of New York or the United States. New York has become a sanctuary city, and as long as you can get there, you can receive medical care and education and food and housing and clothing and all of the other benefits of living here in the good old US of A. The unfortunate thing is that New York is breaking federal law in doing all this, and New York wants to extend that to all of New York State, making New York State sanctuary state. The residents of New York simply cannot afford to pay the cost of illegal immigration into New York State. And so for one of the reasons is the immigration problem that we have in New York. The second reason is taxation. New York just passed a $175 billion budget, and they continue to claim that they don't have enough money. Part of that is because we're paying a huge amount of money to service of the debt and interest on monies that we've borrowed and costs that are incurred as a result of illegal immigration. The other reason is that there's a animus at the state level for gun ownership in New York State. The governor wants no guns in New York. He wants everyone to be disarmed, and he's simply violating the Second Amendment and doing everything he can to make it impossible for the residents of New York to own a firearm and exercise their Second Amendment rights. And because of that, we need to separate ourselves from Andrew Cuomo and downstate New York. Abortion, for me, is a very important issue. As a pastor, it just is reprehensible to me that we are not only allowing abortion, but that we are actually forcing the residents of New York to pay for it, to allow the killing of children up to 2 hours after they're born. We have become a barbaric state. Andrew Cuomo is bent on turning New York State into a haven for all forms of moral debauchery, and we simply do not want to be a part of that. This bathroom bill that was passed that allows men to go into girls' bathrooms, that just simply shouldn't be allowed to happen, and it cannot be allowed to stand. The basis for the separation from New York is very unlike anything anybody has ever done before. In the past, and even currently, there are people who are going to the legislature and they're asking permission to separate from New York State. And that simply is not going to work. Our forefathers tried that in 1776 and before, going to England and asking the king to allow us to be separated from English rule. It didn't work then, and it's not going to work now. The basis for our plan is found in the Declaration of Independence, the consent of the governed. You see, government cannot exist unless the people consent to allow it to exist. It cannot have moral and legal authority without the consent of the governed. And so we're going to withdraw our consent from New York State and establish a separate entity that we can invest our authority in. The Declaration of Independence says it this way. It says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed," look at this, "by their Creator with certain unalienable rights." These rights don't come from the state of New York. They don't come from the federal government. They come from God. Our rights are inalienable. That means they cannot be taken away from us. These rights that are articulated in the Declaration of Independence cannot be taken away from you. No court can take them away, no government can take them away, and no lawyer can talk you out of them. The Declaration of Independence is solid foundation for law in the United States. It says that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. If the people withdraw their consent from the government has no legal or moral authority to govern. Any government who does is dictatorial in nature. The Declaration of Independence goes on to say that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. It's not something we have to ask permission to do. It's something we have a God-given right to do, to alter and abolish the bonds that hold us to a particular government. It is a right. And in fact, it is the only right in the Declaration of Independence that's reiterated, because it goes on to say it is not only the right of the people, it is the duty of the people to throw off that government. The right is something that you do and exercise for your benefit. The duty is something you do for the benefit of others, for the succeeding generations that are to follow, for your children and for your grandchildren. We have not only a right to throw off the bonds that tie us to New York State government, we have an obligation, a duty to throw those bonds off. The existence of the United States is a testament to the right of the people to withdraw consent. When our forefathers realized that petitioning the government in England was not going to secure their life, liberty, and their pursuit of happiness, they determined to separate themselves from England and exercise that God-given right to alter or abolish the government. And as a result, we live in the greatest country in human history. The Declaration of Independence gives us 4 rights: the right to life, the right to liberty, the right to pursuit of happiness, and the right to alter or abolish the government. That's the bedrock of the United States Constitution. The Constitution was written in order to create a government or to establish a government that would hold sacred those 4 inalienable rights: the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In the Constitution, there are only 17 powers given to the federal government. And anything that the government does outside of those 17 powers is unconstitutional. The Constitution grants no rights at all. The rights that you have are given to you under the Declaration of Independence by God. And then after the Declaration of Independence was written, and after the Constitution was ratified and the independence of the United States was secured, unfortunately through war, the Bill of Rights was passed in order to articulate specific rights that the people had that would help them to exercise their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And those rights are the right to freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of press, the right to redress of grievance, and that most precious right, the Second Amendment. And so the ground upon which our project is standing is very solid legal ground. In addition to the United States Constitution, 48 of the 50 states affirm the source of political power to be the people, and that at all times the people have a right to alter or abolish the government when it becomes destructive to the people it was established to serve. The only two states that don't have that verbiage in their constitution at this point are California and New York. And New York's constitution originally had it in there. And keep in mind that these rights that we're talking about are not rights that are given to us by government. They're given to us by God. They're inalienable rights, and they cannot be taken away, even if New York doesn't articulate it in their constitution. The process is very simple. We're going to engage volunteers to petition local town boards and city councils to adopt a resolution of separation from New York State. You see, all political power starts with the people. And in order to withdraw your consent, the people have to bring that request to their most local form of government, town boards, city councils, villages, and petition them to pass a resolution withdrawing the consent of the governed from New York State. That resolution we're calling a resolution of separation. And once that resolution of separation is passed by the towns, then the towns will forward those resolutions onto the counties. We're going to move this resolution up the political ladder, and we're going to pass that to the counties, and then the counties will also pass resolutions of separation from New York State. When we have 3/4 of the 53 counties pass resolutions of separation, that separation becomes binding. The state of New York no longer has legal or moral authority to govern the people of upstate New York once that happens. The 3/4 number is the number that was given to us by our founders in the United States Constitution. And the amendment to the Constitution has to be ratified by 3/4 of the states that are in existence at the time an amendment takes place. And so at this point right now, we have 53 counties that we're asking to join us in our secession movement, and 3/4 of those counties would be 40 counties that would need to pass this resolution. I believe that's an attainable goal, an achievable goal, and I think it can happen in the next 3 years. During this process, legislators who are unwilling to separate from New York will be removed from office using the original primary challenge function of challenging candidates in primaries. And all of our candidates going forward will be carrying this project with them to separate from New York State. We'll find candidates all across the state who are going to challenge legislators who are unwilling to vote in favor of a resolution to separate from New York State. Candidates willing to run for office will run with the primary challenge platform of separation, and primary challenge will not only help them to gain ballot access, but will also help them to man their campaigns, to help fund their campaigns. We won't be funding them, obviously. We won't be allowed to do that, but we'll find volunteers who will help them fund their campaigns. And we'll remove these legislators from office so that the resolution process can be completed. When the process is completed and 40 counties have passed resolutions of separation, notice will be sent to the state of New York, making the separation official, and then the enforcement of that separation will be given to the county sheriffs of the 53 counties, and they will actually make sure that the separation takes place. The leadership of the counties will be the governing body of the new entity, which is going to be called New Amsterdam in our project, but whatever the governing entity decides the name would be. This is the current reality that we live in New York. And I try very hard not to make this a Democrat versus Republican issue, because it's not a Democrat versus Republican issue. It's a right versus wrong issue. It's wrong to tax the people of the state of New York the way we are taxing them. It's wrong to kill babies before, during, or after birth. It's wrong to do many of the things that our government is doing. It's wrong to be antagonistic towards people trying to exercise their Second Amendment rights. It's wrong to do many of the things that the state of New York is doing. But because of the demographics, this is what the reality looks like by voter registration. Currently, 50.2% of the registered voters in New York are registered Democrat, and 22.6% of the voters in New York are registered Republican. If every Republican voted twice, they couldn't outvote the rest of the state. So to say that we could have this change made using the current process that we have in place politically is just ludicrous. We're not going to have it. And so something has to change, and that something is we're going to extricate ourselves from the rest of New York. 27% of the population in New York is registered to neither the Republican nor the Democratic Party. They're independent, conservative, a Liberal Party, Green Party, or just blank. And the largest percentage of that 27% is actually registered blank. If the change were to be made today with the numbers as they are, this is what the political reality would look like. 36.8% of the voters would be registered Democrat. 32.2% would be registered Republican. That would still be a Republican disadvantage in New Amsterdam, but it's not an insurmountable disadvantage. And because 31% of the voters would still be either conservative or independents or blank, depending on how they vote, the state could either go Republican or Democrat. And so it would be an advantage to the people of the state of New York to have that type of government in place. There are benefits to the way this would turn out, if it were to turn out, that it would be a more conservative government, and that is the Electoral College application. Right now, we have no voice in the presidential election. This downstate New York controls the outcome of the general election, and whoever wins the general election controls all of the electoral votes for president in the state of New York. Upstate New York represents roughly 1/3 of the electoral vote of New York. And because we have no say in the outcome of the general election, we have no say in the Electoral College application. By splitting the state into two entities, those electoral votes, roughly 1/3 or nine electoral votes, would be taken away from New York State and applied to the winning candidate for the people of upstate New York. That would obviously take place at the time that the New Amsterdam would become a state, which is a second step that would have to be taken. We would create the political entity called New Amsterdam, and that political entity, once established, would apply for statehood to the federal government. Once that happens, we would have U.S. representation at the United States Senate, where we would be granted 2 representatives. Our representatives right now, Kirsten Gillibrand and Chuck Schumer, have no idea where upstate New York is. Their whole life revolves around the 5 boroughs of New York City. And their views are very antagonistic towards the people of upstate New York. We could have 2 representatives that are from upstate New York in the United States Senate. It would be a great benefit to us. We would have greater influence because of our Senate, the people that we would take and send to the Senate. We would have greater influence in the appointment of federal judges, Supreme Court justices, people on the cabinet of the president, and so on and so on. And we have, at this point, we have no voice at all. We would have a constitution that would be more reflective of the people of New Amsterdam. There are things in the Constitution that we simply need to eliminate. We need to create term limits in our new Constitution. We need to demand a balanced budget. We need to get rid of prevailing wage. And there are so many other things that we could do. We could have initiative and referendum. We could have recall. And there are so many other things that we could put into a Constitution that would be reflective of the values of the people of upstate New York. Those things are never going to happen if we remain tied to New York State. How can I help? Volunteer to be a town representative. We need people in every town in upstate New York. There are 1,120 towns, and each of them is going to be given a resolution to vote on, and we need people who live in those towns and in those cities and in those villages to go to those town meetings and to ask their representatives to vote in favor of the resolution of separation. We need to host public meetings across the state of New York. We need people in Dutchess County. We need people in Greene County. We need people in Orange County. We need people all over New York State to come alongside and hold public meetings so they can hear how this plan works. And I can be honest with you, this is the only plan that's going to work. We're not asking Andrew Cuomo if we can leave. We're telling him that we're leaving. We're taking him up on his invitation to go. We need financial support. In order to buy the advertising that we need, we're going to need the support of the people of upstate New York. And if you have the ability to contribute, we would certainly be grateful for it, and we would use it very wisely. And then we need to tell others. There's no way this is going to succeed unless we start telling people about this project. Town boards are not going to be moved by one or two people. They're going to be moved by hundreds of people. And if we tell people about this project, we will be able to make this happen. This will become a reality. My favorite verse in Scripture regarding political things is this, is that when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice, but when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn. And I submit to you that the people in New York are mourning right now. This is a terrible time for our people. We're watching the very destruction of our state and, by extension, our country. And I'm asking you to join me in this most needed project to separate upstate New York from New York State. Thank you.